Well, it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome celebrated investor Jim Rogers to this World Scholars Academy talk. Mr. Rogers is widely regarded as one of the greatest investors in history. He co-founded the Quantum Fund in 1973, which remains one of the most successful hedge funds of all time. He's also famous for his insightful investment analysis, as well as his prescient market timing. Mr. Rogers has also completed several multi-year round-the-world tours, as recounted in a number of his highly regarded books, such as Investment Biker and Adventure Capitalist. In addition, he is also a proud father of two talented bilingual English and Mandarin speaking daughters, and is himself a graduate of Yale University and the University of Oxford. Mr. Rogers, you have a great depth and breadth of experience on many topics. And on this talk, I'd like to explore a bit your parenting philosophy and the advice you would give to parents and their children to help them best succeed. And on this point, I'd like to start, if I may, with your own life journey. At what point did you know what you wanted to do with your life? Did you head to college with a concrete plan?
Thank you for the introduction, but I make a lot of mistakes in my life. So yes, I get some things right. Now, when I went to college, I had no clue about life, about myself. Thought I was going to be a doctor because my parents told me to be a doctor. Then I realized later that I didn't want to be a doctor, so I thought I'd go to law school like everybody else. Fortunately, I stumbled onto Wall Street quite by chance. I had a summer job only because I liked the guy and he liked me. I knew nothing about Wall Street except it was in New York. And something bad happened in 1929, but I didn't know there was a difference in stocks and bonds when I went to Wall Street. Fortunately, I learned that Wall Street was a place that they would pay you to keep abreast and current about what was happening in the world. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was my passion. So I didn't go to law school or medical school or business school or anything. I went to Wall Street as soon as I could and had a reasonably good time.
Well, that's quite surprising. You know, that was a couple years ago. But these days, I think you might have to know a thing or two about stocks and bonds before going to Wall Street. And I know a number of the students here are kind of interested in business and investment. If they wanted to get in finance, what would you recommend them to do today to start that journey?
Read as much as they can about the world and about finance and investing, Wall Street, stocks, bonds, commodities, everything, currencies. The more you know about the investment world, which includes currencies and includes commodities for many people, the more you know, the more likely you are to get a job and have success.
Great. And one of the things that you talk about quite a bit is the importance of being able to think for yourself. And this is a challenge for all of us, even at the best of times. As social creatures, we're constantly picking up cues from our environment about what are the things we should think, how should we think about things. How can we develop this skill and impart this also, importantly, onto our children to be able to learn this?
Well, I'm trying to teach my children that very thing. So you hit the right point. I'm trying to teach them not to accept what they read in the press or on the TV or something, to figure it out for themselves. I don't quite have the answer yet. If it were that easy, we would all be extremely rich and very successful parents. I'm trying to teach them to question everything that they are told, including something I might tell them. So if you can teach them to question, maybe you're on the right, that put me on the right path anyway. At first, when I went to Wall Street, I just assumed everybody knew what they were doing. They were older, more educated, more experienced. But it didn't take me long by observation to realize, wait a minute, these guys don't know any more than I do. You know, we're all floundering here trying to find successful investments. And so once I realized that they didn't know either, and I had to figure it out for myself, that's when my mistakes kept teaching me more and more lessons.
Do you remember the moment when you made that internal shift in your mind that actually I might know more than these people and I should give myself permission to be the authority?
Well, I remember a couple of times. I remember once I was doing spreadsheets, doing numbers, frantically trying to figure out the numbers for companies, and some older guy walked into the office and said, "Nobody does spreadsheets anymore. What are you doing?" And I can look back on it and tell you that it was at the height of one of Wall Street's bubbles, recurring bubbles, and he was a bubble guy. He was swept away in the bubble, and he didn't last much longer on Wall Street. But none of this did I understand at the time. It was just an observation. When he said nobody does that anymore, I felt embarrassed, but I kept doing it because I somehow knew the importance of trying to understand the facts of what was going on. And I kept learning.
Now, I'm interested too that you studied history at undergrad at Yale, and also philosophy, politics, and economics at Oxford. And you said before that studying philosophy, studying history helped you also think for yourself. Can you tell us about how that works for those of us that might like to study similar things?
Well, history taught me anyway that things are always changing, and that no matter what we think is accurate today will not be correct in 10 or 15 years. And so you better start to understand that and figure out how things are going to be different in 10 or 15 years, which is one of the great studies that, I mean, I'm still fascinated by history, but philosophy will teach you to think. I was not very good at philosophy when I was at Oxford. In later years, I said, oh, now I understand what they were trying to teach me. They were trying to make me to learn to think and figure things out. Although I was not very good at it at first. Eventually, I got it. Both of those things certainly helped me in life.
Great. And being able to think for yourself seems to feed into your other point that you've made, I've seen you make, that is, be who you are, be original, be bold, and that uncommon success requires this. Can you tell us a little bit about this view of yours?
Well, you have to understand, when I went off to Yale, I was completely in over my head. I came from a small backwood towns in Alabama where my phone number was 5. I mean, it was that kind of place. So I was really out of it when I went to Yale, but I had to study and work very hard to survive. And then when I went to Oxford, I was getting a little better at things. And if one can think for oneself, if one can do it, and realize that not everything you read is accurate, and you have to figure out what's accurate, chances are you will be successful. But to do that, you first have to figure out what you love the most. Whatever it is you love the most is where you should focus, and then that may lead you to some kind of success at whatever the field is. And it doesn't matter what the field is. If you love gardening, be a gardener. If you love history, read history. If you love finance, do history. But whatever it is you love, pursue it.
You clearly value formal education to a great extent. What did your time at Yale and Oxford provide you that has benefited you in your life and career going forward?
Well, I tell my children if they want to go to college, it's fine, but they have to go far away. They cannot go to college near home. Because for me, anyway, one of the best parts of my college education was going far, far away, where everybody did things differently, thought differently, had different expectations, drove different cars. I mean, everything was totally, hopelessly different when I went to Yale. And that was an extremely eye-opening and educational experience. The same thing happened when I went to Oxford. Oh my gosh, it was far away. They had no idea of some of the things that I grew up with, but it made me think and develop and grow.
What do you think about this point of the importance of travel and exposure to international cultures, especially to the youth? What kind of benefits do you think it provides?
Well, I guess, and I'd have to think about this, but I guess the single best education I know is to travel and see other parts of the world. I know my wife certainly would tell you that. She grew up in a small town too, and she and I traveled around the world. She would tell you that travel is the best education. I would tell you, as part of what I just said before, that going far away from home is an extraordinary education, because you have to learn. You don't have any choice but to learn a lot, because everything is different and everything is functioning when you go, but they're functioning in a different way from your experience. And you have to learn to function in different ways. And you have to understand that people do many things in different ways from where you grew up. For me, anyway, I would say that's the best. See the world is the best education.
And what about moving to a different country? I mean, you've moved from the U.S. to Singapore in recent years. Has this been difficult? A move to uproot yourself from a culture you're familiar with? How do you feel about it overall?
That's part of the same genre. Just you must learn to adapt. I mean, yes, we moved to Singapore. We moved to Singapore because I wanted my children to know Asia and to speak Mandarin. I was doing it in New York, but it was not nearly as successful. So we decided to move to a place where they had to speak Mandarin, where they had to learn about Asia, which in my view was going to be the most important part of the world in their lifetime. But I will tell you, millions of people have uprooted and moved to different nations throughout history, including the U.S. The U.S. would not be there if people hadn't packed up and gone to a new world. And thank goodness they did. Thank goodness my forebears did. Thank goodness your forebears did. But I now realize it's not that simple. It's very complicated to move to a new place. But if you can do it, it is a very interesting and exciting experience. We like it in Singapore a great deal, but it was certainly different from the small town where I grew up.
Very interesting. I think it's a dream of many parents to have their children speak another language, a very valuable second language. What are some of the pitfalls that you experienced in trying to teach your daughters Mandarin?
Well, first, it's just for them. It's not, I remember when my older daughter was 2 or 3, we were in Shanghai, and some Chinese came running over to her, this little blue-eyed girl, and said, "How did you learn Chinese?" And she didn't know what they were talking about. She didn't learn Chinese. I didn't learn English. I just grew up speaking English. Well, that's the way it was with her. I mean, now she understands what they were talking about. So she just grew up. She thought, oh, some people speak like this and some people speak like this. She thought everybody was like that when she was 2 or 3 years old. I will say that if you want to do something like this, the best way to do it is to have someone speaking the second language in your household, whether it's a governess or another parent or some grandparent or somebody, because then the children think it's a natural part of life and they adapt naturally.
So you had a caretaker from a very young age speaking the language to your children.
Yes. I mean, both of my girls, it turns out, nothing to do with me, speak perfect Mandarin. I mean, the Chinese on TV, they want them to be on Chinese TV because they said their Mandarin is so good. It had nothing to do with me because I don't speak Mandarin at all. But somehow or another, these little girls wound up speaking perfect Mandarin. Literally, CCTV, which is the Chinese National Broadcasting Network, has invited my children up 3 times that during Chinese New Year, the most important time of the year, to do programs about them. And not because of me. I can barely speak English, but these kids apparently speak perfect Mandarin somehow.
Well, you got to give yourself some credit. You had the foresight to realize how important it was to teach your children at an early age and provide them this opportunity. Why don't more schools teach languages in kindergarten? Really, this is the time when they should be taught. Why doesn't everyone realize this, and why isn't this part of our national curriculum?
Oh my gosh, you've asked the most penetrating and important, one of the most important questions in America these days. For some reason, speaking a second language is not considered worth pursuing by many, many people in the United States, including politicians and teaching associations. I don't know. Maybe I've got it completely wrong, but I know that speaking a second language is extremely important in life. And when you're in your 20s or 30s or 40s, you will realize that if you can speak a second language well, you have a huge leg up, especially, I hate to say it, especially compared to other Americans, because we are basically, most of us, illiterate when it comes to a second language. I hate saying it. I have advocated it many times, but not many people listen.
Couldn't agree more. Moving on to another topic. You've said in the past that when you're thinking about a potential career, that you should make sure that the job is right for you and not to chase money, because the money will come. Can you tell us a little bit about your viewpoints on this topic?
Well, I have learned and observed that some people will, the first question, or one of the first questions is, how much do you pay me? That is not the question that people should ask. If people find the right job for themselves, one that they will love, they will thrive. They will thrive, and the money will come. And listen, employers around the world know that people who are smart and diligent and work hard are very hard to find. And everybody who employs someone wants to find a girl or boy who is intense and dedicated and driven and crazed. That's who we all want to find. So if you can find that person, I promise you, we all will pay that person more as they go along. And if you love it, the money will come. The money will find you if you're a hardworking, diligent employee.
I think a lot of students would say on this point that, well, I just don't know what it is that I really like yet. What would you say to that student to help them figure out for themselves what it is they're really passionate about and what they should be pursuing with their life?
I was exactly the same place when I was a senior at university. I had no clue. I told you I was going to go to law school and medical school and business school. I was completely confused college senior like everybody else in my college. But I found out by chance. I told you I had a summer job. But if people can, and many people never figure this out, and it's sad, and they wound up their whole lives doing something they aren't passionate about. But some clues that I have picked up in my life is that if, for instance, you go to a doctor's office and there are 500 magazines in there, what do you read? You read about sports or fashion or cars or agriculture. What do you read? That may start to give you a hint as to what you love the most. And if you can figure out what you love the most, partly by just observing your own life and how you spend your time, it may put you on the right path. And by the way, if people say to you, oh, you should not do that, that's got no future, you probably know you're on the right path, because you know you want to do something that you love and other people don't yet approve of.
You have a point, because if you think about it, that's going to be something that not a lot of other people are going to be competing in. So if you're really passionate about it, you can be the number one potentially in that field.
Well, for what it's worth, when I went to Wall Street, it was the 60s, and it was a backwater. The idiot son went to Wall Street in those days because of the 20s, many things in history that life. Wall Street is no longer the backwater and no longer the place for the idiot son. Everybody wants to go there, but at the time when I was there, for historic and economic reasons, Wall Street was not a good place to go. Fortunately, I didn't know that. Nobody told me that then. I learned later, but I knew I loved it. I knew that's where I wanted to be. And even if they told me you're at the wrong place, it's where I wanted to be, because I knew it was a lot of fun.
Great. And when you got to Wall Street, I imagine you didn't figure it out completely on your own, that you had some type of mentors and apprenticeship learning from the experts while you were there. Could you talk about perhaps some of the experts that you profitably learned from, and how to attract these into your own life if you figured out the path that you want to embark on?
Well, I do remember some older people telling me you need to understand the numbers, you need to understand the balance sheets. Of course, I didn't know what a balance sheet was when I went to Wall Street, but I realized through experience that if I did figure out the numbers, the balance sheets, the profit and loss statements, and if I read the annual report, I was doing more than most people. I mean, everybody, unfortunately, wants to be rich this week. Everybody wants a hot tip. Everybody wants to be rich overnight. And I learned it doesn't work that way. I don't quite know how I learned that, but it doesn't happen overnight. You should not listen to hot tips. You need to understand the numbers, and you need to understand the company. And I learned at an early age that if I actually read the annual report of a company I wanted to invest in, I was doing more than 90% of the people on Wall Street. If I read the notes to the annual report, I was doing more than everybody. Somehow, by experience or something, I learned at an early age, you need to do your homework. And I still know you need to do your homework.
Absolutely. Did you ever seek out experts in certain areas to help you with learning some particular fields?
Well, nearly always, whenever I go and start doing a new industry, whether it's whatever it happens to be, cars, I always know that I need to find somebody who knows more than I do, because I usually don't know very much. And I try to find somebody who is knowledgeable in that field and talk to them, ask some questions, get guidance to figure out how things work. I wish it were easy that all I had to do was read page 37. But there is no page 37. You have to learn yourself by talking to people, reading, and having experience. I wish it were easy to get rich on a hot tip. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
That's right. Yeah, I've often heard the phrase, the more you try to get rich quick, you'll stay broke longer, which makes a lot of sense.
That is certainly an extremely insightful expression.
So I imagine you had to learn through the school of hard knocks, dealing with mistakes in the market. How did you turn inwards to learn from this and move forward in the most optimal way? How does one do that?
Well, mainly by lack of choice. I once lost everything. I once had a great success, thought I was very smart, thought I was going to be the next genius, lost. And then, of course, a few weeks later, I lost everything. But that was very, I was unhappy at the time, but I didn't have much choice except get up the next day, go to work, and try to save some money and start over. I mean, looking back and look at history, there are people who become a monk or commit suicide, or they change their lives completely. None of those things seemed interesting to me. So all I knew to do was to get up the next day, go to work, and keep trying, save some money, and try to start over. And that's what I did. Fortunately, it worked.
Well, inevitably, you have this type of setback. It's going to take a knock to your self-confidence. But deep down, you must have believed in yourself on a deeper level to be able to keep moving forward in the way that you have. Can that be taught? Where did that self-belief come from?
Well, I hope that you're right, but I will say that whenever I speak to students, especially, I try to explain that failure is not necessarily bad. Failure can teach you a lot if you learn from it. Many of the great success stories in life and in history have failed once or twice or more. And the people who do well are the people who persist. I mean, we all know smart people who are not successful, and beautiful people who are not successful, and talented people who are not successful. The people who are successful are the ones who never give up. I try to teach my children the single most important word is perseverance. Just never give up. and you will probably be okay in the end. And you will certainly be happy, even if you're not terribly successful. So perseverance is an extremely important word, no matter what you're trying to do. Don't give up.
Great advice.
I hope we can all learn it, because perseverance, I now know, is an extremely important trait.
And when you retired, in quotes, from investing, you moved on to teach business at Columbia Business School. How was that experience? Did that experience make you a better investor, for starters?
Well, yes, I did that because I wanted to learn to play squash. And
Oh.
Columbia had squash courts and tennis courts near my house. So that's how that started. I had no idea. I told the dean, I'm only going to teach one course. I think teaching is a waste of time. It turned out that I loved it. The students loved it. It was a very successful course. So I kept doing it. But that was not my plan. That all happened by accident. But it does teach you a lot about other people, first of all. And it teaches you about whatever it is you're teaching a lot, because the students will ask questions, new and different questions, and make you think in different ways. And if you can add that to your brain power, you're on your way. And yes, students come up with strange questions sometimes, but the stranger the question, often the better for you.
It seems to me that you love to teach, though. I mean, that really comes across both in your books and in your speeches. What do you get out of teaching?
Well, it's certainly a great thrill to sit there in a room and watch a person change in front of your eyes, to see their minds open up right there in front of your eyes when you start talking about a subject, or they ask a question, or you raise a point that they never thought of in their lives. And it all happens. You can see it happen, and it's very exciting to watch it happen in front of your eyes. And always, I mean, many students that I've had have looked back and said, oh my God, you changed my life. I didn't know I was changing anybody's life, but I do now know, and I now understand that you can change somebody's life. And as I just said, sometimes you can see it happen in your classroom in front of your eyes. And it's very exciting to see somebody's life change, especially for the better. And if you can do that, to me anyway, it was exciting and fun.
Yeah, I agree. There's really nothing better. It's a great joy to be able to do that. One question I have for you is, I know that in my life, I've seen many parents who are successful have kids that they have trouble passing on the same work ethic and drive to succeed to their children that they have. Do you have any thoughts from your own experience, both in the world, on how best this could be done?
Boy, that is an extremely important trait if you can figure it out. How do we teach our children? How do we give our children, first of all, the work ethic? Because every employer knows that the work ethic is very important. I don't know how. I see that both of my daughters have it. I never sat down and said, okay, this is something called the work ethic, and this is something you need. Never, I don't know how both of my daughters have this incredible work ethic. I guess they must have watched us, the parents. I guess we have it, and we either consciously or subconsciously pass it on by example. I don't know how, and I know that my brothers all have the work ethic, so obviously they got it from watching our parents. I don't know how to do it, but if you can teach people how to instill a work ethic in young people, the parents are going to be happy, the children are going to be happy, the employers are going to be happy, the world is going to be a better place.
Do you think it's any harder to develop this type of work ethic, perseverance, and a drive to succeed these days than it was when you were growing up?
Well, I mean, who knows? I presume it is, just because of technology, and everybody has iPhones and so many ways to distract themselves now. I guess we had ways to distract ourselves, but some people had work ethic despite the distractions back then. And I see my children have this work ethic despite all the distractions. I don't know if it's easier or harder. I think it probably comes more from the parents. I guess parents and grandparents are where work ethic comes from. And I don't know how they got it or how to pass it on. If you know, send me an email.
Will do. Well, one of the things that you've talked about and that you've really taken on as something important in your life is to be ethical. Sometimes people in the financial industry can get reputations that aren't ideal, but you've made a point of always making sure that you behave in an ethical way. Can you tell us your thought process around this and what you and the reasons why you've adopted this as a life motto?
Well, again, I think it must come from my parents, unconsciously or subconsciously somehow, but I have observed that you can do things the right way or you can cut corners. I have observed many people cutting corners, but I know that in the end, the people that cut corners pay for it. I mean, especially but in every walk of life, especially finance, it's a small community. And if you cut corners, word is going to get around that Mary is one of those people who doesn't keep her word or whatever it happens to be. And people are very, very leery, especially in finance, for so much, at least in the old days, especially so little was written down. There weren't no contracts as most people know them. So if you cut corners, it didn't take long for people to understand that. It didn't take long for you to suffer. And many of them left the business, had to leave the business because people knew they weren't reliable. And I know that exists in every walk of life, no matter what your profession or what your walk of life, that if you cut corners and if you don't keep your word, people learn and they talk. And they tell other people that old Sam doesn't keep his word, doesn't do what he says. And that is usually a kiss of death.
What does it mean when you find somebody who, despite trying personal circumstances, will keep their word anyway and live up to their promises?
Well, then we all know that old Sam, we don't have to worry. If he says the sky is blue, we know the sky is blue. We don't even have to go look out the window. And that's an important trait, no matter what you're doing with old Sam, that if you know he's good for what he says, you can try to do things with him that you might not try otherwise.
Right, yeah. They'll take you on probably over and above someone else that they might have more experience, because they'll look at you and say, this person is a straight shooter and I want to work with him going forward.
And is reliable. You need reliability when you're doing anything, especially if it's a project or a new project. You need reliability when you're moving forward.
It's incredibly valuable. You said in your book, recent book, Street Smarts, this great Arthurian line that money is the lance, not the grail. What do you mean by this?
Well, money can help you do things. If you want to be a farmer, it is useful to have some money to buy a tractor or whatever, to buy fertilizer or whatever. Money can help you with things, but money is not the only thing. Money, if you sit around trying and thinking about making money all the time, you're probably not going to be as successful if you sit around thinking about what is it I love, how do I do it? Oh, I have a new thought. I want to pursue my new idea, my new thought. If you figure that out instead of, oh my God, I got to have more money. If you take a job, I said before, if you take a job based on the money instead of the enjoyment or the pleasure, you're probably not going to be as successful as the people who take the job that they love and pursue a life that they love. If you do what you love, you're probably going to be the most successful because you're happy every day. You never go to work. You wake up every morning and start having fun. And even if you're not as successful as some people, you don't care because you're happy. Happy people don't care how successful they are because they're happy. And there is a lot to be said for having a happy life.
Couldn't agree more. I'm curious.
And having a happy life often leads to success. Don't get me wrong. You can have both. You can have both.
That's right. And if you're not loving what you're doing and happy every day, it's going to come across in your work. It's going to come across in your dedication. It's going to come across in all the things that you've mentioned that are so crucial. Really that's kind of the foundation of being able to have these qualities that you say are so crucial to becoming a success.
Other people will know, you will know it, other people will know it, it will permeate everything.
Great advice. You said in the past that you thought you'd never want to have kids, but then you changed your mind, and I'm curious, becoming a parent, how has that made you a better investor, being a parent now?
Well, I was the oldest of 5 sons, and I could see that it was 5 children is a burden on anyone. And it was certainly a financial burden, an emotional burden, every kind of burden, especially back in a small town where nobody had a lot of money. I realized that maybe if my parents hadn't had these 5 sons, they would have been more successful or happier or something. So that lesson came through to me, rightly or wrongly. And I said, well, I'm not going to waste my time having children. I'm going to have my own life, because my own life will be mine and I will be happier, whatever I want to do. For instance, I wanted to go around the world. Well, I couldn't very well go around the world twice. I went twice, having 5 children. So for whatever reason, I never wanted to have children. I felt sorry for my friends who had children. I figured they'd ruin their lives. Then I had one later in life, and I realized I was wrong. Everybody should have children. Children are an astonishing experience, and I urge everybody to have a child at some point in their life, because it's a very exciting and wonderful experience. You learn a lot from your kids. My kids gave me emotions I didn't know I had.
Wow. Well, sounds like everyone needs to experience that.
Well, if you ask me, yes, even if you think it's going to be bad, it's probably going to be good.
Good advice to hear. So I'm going to ask the people on the call if they have a question to write into the chat their question, and we'll turn to that in a second. But before that, I want to ask Mr. Rogers here, what are your current goals and ambitions, the things that drive you every day that you're excited about to take that lance to the world?
Well, I just answered this, my children. I told you I never wanted children. I had my first child when I was 60 years old. I think I was 60. Now, the most important thing for me is my children. I want to do anything I can to make them successful, happy, prosperous, whatever it is. I want to do everything I can to help them and to do things with them. Now, I have 2 teenage girls, and some of you remember being a teenage girl or a teenage boy. Teenagers can be complicated at times, but still, I'm very, very, very pleased I did it, and I hope that I can do more for them. When I said more, I don't know what more is, because children are always changing, but I hope I can make their lives better.
Great. In terms of the things that you encourage your daughters to do growing up, did you have them to try to take on jobs and to take like summer schools abroad and various things to expand their experiences. What were some of the proactive things that you did to try to show them a bit more of the world and give them the type of experiences that you've had?
Well, I told my older daughter when she was 14, she had to get a job because everybody should have a job, especially teenagers, for many reasons. I thought she would go to McDonald's and get a job making $8 an hour. But she's a lot smarter than I am. She got a job teaching Chinese, making $35 an hour, and complaining because the grown-ups made $70 an hour. She thought she should make more, even though she was a teenage girl. So yes, I do know that having a job, whatever the job is something that's important for all of us, but at a young age. So that was something I have tried to encourage or insist that my children do. I've certainly tried to show them some of the world. I don't know if that's good. I know it's good to see the world and experience the world, but I don't know if, when I started seeing the world, I was much younger. I mean, I was much older than they are, and I didn't have any money, and so I had to do it the hard way. So I don't know if doing it the easy way is good, but they certainly, my goodness, my children have seen places I never heard of when I was a teenager. So I hope it's a good experience for them. You can ask me in 20 years.
Okay, we'll do. Look forward to it. Well, we've got a question from Dan here, and he asks, there's a lot of economic turbulence in the US with bank collapse and inflation, and a lot of people giving contrasting words of advice to the youth. What do you recommend for someone who's looking to begin investing for the long term, but doesn't fully understand what first steps to take?
Well, Dan, first of all, I would urge you to learn as much as you can about the basics. You need to know what a stock is. You need to know what a bond is. You need to know a few things like interest rates, what they are and what they mean. But then after that, what you need to know most of all is to stay with what you know. Don't listen to hot tips from me or from anyone else. You know a lot about something, or you will know a lot about something before it's over. Stay with what you know, and that's where you will find investment opportunities. If I told you that you can only have 25 investments in your life, you would be very careful. You wouldn't be jumping in and out of things. You wouldn't be listening to everybody's hot tips. You would find things that you know are going to be successful. You would do some research, and you would probably be a successful investor. Now, some people will say, oh, but that's boring. Who cares what I like? I'm telling you, if you want to be a successful investor, stay with what you know and be boring.
So would you recommend Dan to wait until he thinks he knows something about the market, about a particular investment before he moves?
Yes, I certainly would hope you will wait until you know something about it. And you said something interesting. He thinks he knows. Yeah, you're going to think you know long before you know, and it's going to lead to mistakes. Don't let your mistakes discourage you too much. Just remember to learn from your mistakes. I remember some of my early mistakes. Fortunately, I learned from them.
I think that understanding a bit of risk management would be important, a bit of not putting all of your eggs in one basket. I know that some other famous investors talk about the dangers of over diversification. What's your position on that?
Well, if you want to be successful, if you want to be rich, diversification is not the way to go. Now, I know all the brokers teach and preach diversification because that's they don't want to be sued. If you diversified your portfolio, they can say, oh, well, see, he had a diversified portfolio. You can't sue me. But Henry Ford didn't diversify. He focused on automobiles and got very rich. So if you find something that you know is great, focus. Put your eggs in one basket, but watch that basket very carefully. You better be sure about that basket or you're going to go broke in an afternoon. Just be very sure of what you're doing.
Thank you. Another question from Moses here. How will AI affect investing?
Well, AI is changing everything, is going to change, is changing everything we know. It's going to put a lot of people out of business. But electricity put a lot of people out of business too. You know, when the world has dramatic changes, it usually damages some people, but it helps other people. So, I mean, I don't know. I know AI is going to put a lot of back offices out of business. But again, electricity did too. So don't worry about it. Just figure it out. And I have not figured it out fully yet. I do know that I'd love to find some good AI companies. We all would. The problem is you have to have some technological understanding in order to find the new successful companies. But do your research, be attentive, and find the good ones, and you will make a lot of money. There will be failures. There'll be lots of failures, so be careful.
Thank you. And Moses continues, what kind of skill sets would you think teenagers to early 20s age children would have to be able to be investors or similar technical professional jobs?
Well, curiosity, skepticism, first of all, do not believe everything you read or hear. Do your own research, do your own checking. If everybody says to you the sky is blue, go look out the window to make sure it's blue. Check for yourself. Be sure that everything you hear and think is correct and accurate, because a lot of it will not be correct and accurate, especially in the investment world. Everybody has a hot tip. Everybody has a great new thing. Do your research to be sure.
Quite daunting when you think about it. There's so many things that we take it on authority or just popular opinion as being true, to have to pick through within ourselves all of these different assumptions that we've made can feel a bit discouraging and maybe overwhelming. How would you approach that from that concern?
Well, I want to say to you, it's not easy getting rich. I wish this were easy. I wish all we had to do was read chapter 3 of somebody's book and it would be off and running. No, it's extremely difficult to be successful as an investor or anything else. So I just want to say to you again and again, only invest in what you yourself know a lot about, and make sure you know enough about it that you're not making a mistake. And even if you know a lot about something, you will make mistakes. I certainly did, but certainly in the early days. So wish it were easy. Just please, please, please only invest in things that you yourself know a lot about.
That's useful for all of us to hear, because we will experience these setbacks, and to have that mindset of inner self-belief and knowing that this isn't the end, and I can pick myself up and make myself an even bigger success, crucially important. But on this point, actually, of skill sets and education, I find it interesting that you've said that business school is a waste of time, and yet you've taught at business schools. What type of education then is useful when it comes to learning about business?
Well, I'm going to say the ability to think for yourself. I mean, that's a cliche, obviously, and everybody will say that, but it's accurate. It's not easy to learn to think for yourself. I wish it were. You need to know the basics. You need to know what assets and liabilities are. You need to know what debt is. You need to know how these things affect companies. There are some basics you need to know. You've got to know what stocks and bonds are. If you're going to be an investor, you have to know what commodities are. There are a lot of basics that you need. These things are reasonably simple to learn and to figure out. But please be sure you know about them, at least before you start. And also be sure to know about the effects of leverage, of borrowing money. Borrowing money can be useful if you are good at it, if you know how to handle it. There's been some great success stories in life based on a lot of borrowed money. But most stories in life based on borrowed money have led to failure, because the debt can be extremely dangerous and extremely problematical if you cannot handle it. Do understand about debt. And I will say again, most people who use debt fail, but there are few that become extremely successful. Just be very careful about debt.
Thank you. So you've had tremendous insight in seeing in advance changes to markets. So for instance, in the late 90s, you started a commodities index before a great bull market in commodities, and you've been in advance of a lot of market crashes in predicting that they would come along. How did you develop this ability to see into the future in ways that other people have struggled to do on any type of consistent basis?
Well, I guess part of it was I grew up in a poor, backwoods part of the world where everybody knew that money was hard to get and you had to work awfully hard to get it. And even then you might not get it. So I guess I had some reality in my life. When I first went to Wall Street, I heard some strange things. I said, how can they say that? How can they believe that? Money doesn't just fall out of the sky. So I guess it was a skepticism, having grown up where everybody was poor and where nobody had any money, and we all knew that money didn't grow on trees. So you make a cliche that money is hard to get, and if somebody says to you, "Oh, don't worry, this is easy," or "It's different this time," oh my gosh, if you hear it's different this time or that it's easy now, please leave the room.
Thank you. You said that the greatest investment you can make is to teach your children to be smart, educated, knowledgeable, ambitious, and have perseverance. Why are our children our greatest investment?
Well, because the children are going to be your future, whether you know it or not. Many people love their children and are keen on their children and are very involved with their children because they're their children. That's certainly the case with me. I care enormously about what my children do and how they do it. I guess it's because they're my children. And I hope we all love our children. I certainly know cases where people don't love their children and murder their children or vice versa. But for me, it's been extremely important, and for most people, that our lives revolve around our children's lives, whether that's nature. I don't know what that is, but I know for most of us, it's true. It's truer than we realize in many cases. Is it nature? I don't know. I'll let you answer.
Certainly is the case, whatever the source ultimately. We have another question from Karen. Which was one of your favorite investments, and which was an investment that you wished you had that got away?
Oh my gosh. Every investment that I missed, I wish I hadn't let get away. For instance, I went to China in 1984, and I could see what was happening in China. I could see that China was going to be a great country. And I guess if I'd really been smart, I would have stayed in China in the 80s. I went back to New York, had a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful life in the 80s and 90s. But if I'd gone back to China and stayed in China, I'd probably be really rich now. Because you know what's happened to China in the last 30 years, 40 years. I saw it happening. I guess if I'd stayed, I know I would have an entirely different life, probably an extremely successful life. Don't let me get it wrong. I've had a wonderful life. I've had a successful life. I'm very pleased. I'm just saying that that's probably something where I could have taken a different path and did not.
Great. What's your next book?
Well, I don't have one at the moment, and at least in my experience, one should probably not do a book unless one really won't, unless you really have it in you, unless it's something you really want to do. I mean, somebody could come to you and say, oh, do the book about X. Well, unless you really love X and are very keen to do a book about X, I do not encourage it. I don't know if I'm right or not. I'm certainly not as experienced as many people. But from what I know, one should, if you're going to do a book, the most successful books are the books that come from your own soul and your own passion.
Is that why you wanted to write books initially?
No. I never thought I was going to write a book. That was not in my horizon. It's only after when I run around the world on a motorcycle. The first night I was back. I was at a big dinner in New York, and a guy said to me, oh, Jim, where you been? I haven't seen you in a while. I said, I just went around the world on a motorcycle. And he said, oh, my gosh, I want the book. I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I mean, I knew the guy. He was the famous publisher in New York, and it led to a book. But this was all quite by accident. It was never, if I hadn't been at a dinner that night with that guy, I don't know if I'd ever would have done a book. But it led to a book which was fun, successful, interesting, and so I've done more books since.
Well, I'm sure all of us on the call would love to live a life that we could recount in a book that people would like to read. So I guess we all have to go take up that lance and go slay some of our own dragons. But I just want to say thank you so much, Jim, for coming onto this call. We greatly appreciate your time, and thank you for passing on your deep wisdom to everyone here. How can we follow your activities and continue to learn from you going forward?
Well, I haven't written another book. I guess you could read my books, but I don't know. I don't have a newsletter. I don't have anything to sell. You know, I'm a simple person. I periodically am interviewed, such as this one, which has been most useful for me anyway. So I hope that, I guess if you can find my interviews or find something that I've written, but I don't really have anything to sell, I'm afraid. I'm a simple person from a very small backwoods town.
And very admirable at that. So thank you very much, Jim. It's been a pleasure, and all the best.
My pleasure. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you.